Hello, once again, and welcome to another episode of Out of Time Reviews, the mostly weekly series where I look at the latest new releases to hit theaters and streaming. I'm Andrew Parker, senior writer and film critic for thegate.ca. Thanks for coming back. If this isn't your first time here, and if it is your first time here, feel free to poke around the video and channel and enjoy yourself. No new interviews on the channel this week to talk about, but plenty to look forward to next week, so stay tuned for those. That means, here with you on the hottest day of the year so far, we could just get together to talk about the 9 offerings we're going to cover on this week's show, including Masters of the Universe, the second big screen outing for He-Man and all of his assorted buddies and enemies, Paul Rudd and Nick Jonas squabbling over songwriting credits in the dramedy Power Ballad, Samara Weaving and Kyle Gallner hit the road for the thrilling crime romance Carolina Caroline, a deep dive into the history and enduring iconography of one of literature and film's most iconic characters in the documentary It's Dorothy, a behind-the-scenes look at one of the biggest children's television series with the documentary What's the Story Wishbone, actor Ben McKenzie makes great use of his degree in economics with the crypto-skeptic documentary Everyone is Lying to You for Money, Danny Boyle's iconic drug-fueled Irvine Welsh adaptation Trainspotting comes back to theaters, Anna Faris and Sean and Marlon Wayans return to the juvenile gags of the slasher movie parody series Scary Movie, and Javier Bardem and Amy Adams face off in the series update of the classic thriller Cape Fear. Like, share, and subscribe if you feel so inclined, and strap yourselves in for another stacked week of things to watch and or avoid.
Whoa.
It is quite heavy, so if you could just...
Oh my God, yeah. Your loincloth is in my... Sorry.
Fine.
So, how does it feel to be the mighty warrior?
All things considered, I feel pretty great.
Not quite sure what happened to my shirt, though. Where are my pants? Do those come back, or I have to buy a new pair every time?
Following a derivative zero-to-hero arc cobbled together from any number of other successful crowd-pleasing blockbusters from across the past decade, Masters of the Universe plays heavily to the nerdy nostalgia crowd with charming and entertaining, but not exactly game-changing effect. Nicholas Galitzine steps into the pink shirt, khaki pants, loincloth, and battle armor of Prince Adam, the potential savior and heir to the throne of Eternia, a magical place of never-ending wonder that's been thrown into darkness and chaos by the evil Lord Skeletor, played by Jared Leto. Sent to Earth by his parents to protect him at the age of 10, Adam is now 25, working a dead-end job in HR and trying to find the sword of power that he lost when crashing down on the unfamiliar planet. Whenever Adam talks about his younger days, no one on Earth believes him. When Adam does find the sword in an unlikely and convenient location, the forces of good and evil converge on Earth briefly before the undertrained Adam is brought back to Eternia by his childhood crush and former training buddy Tila, played by Camila Mendes, to hopefully set things right and stop Skeletor's plans to rule over the now devastated planet. The Guardians of the Galaxy and recent Dungeons & Dragons movie vibes are heavy throughout Masters of the Universe, a film about an earthbound schlub with an extraterrestrial destiny who's backed up by an assortment of quirky supporting characters with unique personalities. Director and Laika co-founder Travis Knight knows this kind of vibe well, having previously directed the just as fun and self-reflexive toy-based throwback action comedy Bumblebee, which was spun off from the Transformers franchise. Masters of the Universe is so keen on feeling like a James Gunn, Marvel, or DC movie that it even includes a virtually duplicate shot of all the heroes standing tall together and a grand finale that tonally feels similar to last year's Superman. It also starts out with a lengthy, slow prologue that doesn't jive well with the rest of the film's brisker pacing. There's some little naughty bits that push the boundaries of the PG-13 rating that could bristle sensitive adults with kids, but those moments will resonate pretty strongly with the core audience. Original ideas are not this film's strongest asset, and the plot points are just on the wrong side of feeling stale, meaning it's entirely up to Knight and his cast to pull up this thing before crash landing. For his part, Knight leans into the material's love for all things 80s and 90s, heavily pulling from the likes of Ridley Scott's legend and cult classic favorite Flash Gordon just as much as he does more contemporary films. Knight knows that the tone for this should be loose, campy, and never more serious than it has to be. The look of the digital landscapes are somewhat hit or miss, save for a chase and subsequent expository sequence in an enchanted forest that looks outstanding. But Knight, whose primary job outside of helming blockbusters like this rests in pushing the capabilities of stop-motion animation, brings a lot of handmade touches that dazzle brighter. The practical makeup effects, character designs, costumes, and many of the sets are captivating and colorful. In the lead, Galatzine makes for a lovable, awkward doofus version of He-Man who has great people skills and is very lucky that his fighting abilities come in an instant once he figures out how to use the Sword of Power. He's likable, easygoing, and self-deprecating, knowing full well what his purpose is here. He has wonderful chemistry alongside Mendes' more battle-ready but surprisingly charming Teela. Idris Elba looks like he's having fun getting a chance to lean into more comedic territory as Teela's father, the drunken and run-down former man-at-arms. Alison Brie has fun camping and vamping it up as evil sorceress Evelyn, and Kristen Wiig delivers some deadpan laughs as a former battle droid demoted to the position of housekeeper. But the biggest surprise of all here has to be Leto, who after a string of subpar turns manages to deliver the funniest performance of his career as the overly assured and sometimes neurotic Skeletor. It's the kind of jovial, boisterous, playful performance I didn't know he had in him. And if you're the kind of person who's extremely sour on Leto these days, it has the benefit of the fact that you never once have to see his face. The commitment of Knight, the technical crew, and the cast helps to paper over a lot of the scattershot script's shortcomings to produce something that's fun in the moment, but not likely to have any major lasting impact, kinda like Mandalorian and Grogu from a couple weeks ago. This one gets a 6 out of 10 from me. It's a film that I enjoyed in spite of how familiar all of this feels. You've seen this kind of movie before, you know everything that's going to happen, even the bits that pop up during the credits, and yet you still don't mind that much because this is exactly what you signed up for. And if nothing else, it's better than the 1987 adaptation of these same characters. Speaking of crowd pleasers where viewers likely know what they're getting into when they buy a ticket, here's Once in Sing Street director John Carney's latest music-driven story, Power Ballad, an engaging, serviceable, and sometimes purposefully cringe-inducing blend of melodrama and comedy that melds feel-good vibes with emotional brutality. And that's precisely the kind of film that Carney excels at making. Paul Rudd stars as the appropriately named Rick Power, a singer-songwriter who gave up the rigorous touring life of his old band in the 80s and 90s to settle down in Ireland with his wife and daughter. Today, he works as a human jukebox as the singer of one of the most successful wedding bands in the country, although it's clear that he deeply misses playing some of his original songs. At one wedding, Rick crosses paths with Danny Wilson, played by Nick Jonas, a former boy band member who's struggling with getting his long, simmering solo career off the ground. After the ceremony, where Rick gets a viral moment in the spotlight from sharing the stage with Danny, the two share stories and songs over some weed and drinks. They hit it off, with each giving some constructive feedback and gentle collaboration during an all-night jam session. One day, while riffing at home in the midst of his ongoing writer's block, Danny starts playing one of Rick's songs, immediately catching the ear of his girlfriend, played by Havana Rose Liu. 6 months later, Rick hears Danny singing his song and realizes that it's going to be a huge hit. But Danny has neglected to give Rick a songwriting credit on the track, and without any concrete proof that he helped conceive of the song, Rick doesn't have a legal leg to stand on. The once seemingly helpful and kind Danny starts ghosting Rick and hiding behind his manager, played by Carney alum Jack O'Connell. This sets Rick on an ill-conceived course for revenge and recognition. While Carney certainly knows how to make films that connect with audiences and songs that can immediately capture the ear of anyone who hears them in a movie, the Irish filmmaker does have a lot of tropes that he loves to stick to. The music business will chew you up and spit you out. Things used to be so much easier back in his day. There's nobility in being unrecognized and uncompensated as long as you sing from the heart. Money doesn't solve all of your problems. If you've seen one Carney film, you already know the ideological backbone of Power Ballad before it even starts. But he's so assured at these kinds of stories that it's as welcome and familiar as a dog-eared copy of your favorite book. Carney isn't a master stylist, but he's always able to capture the fine details of the world of his characters, be they every people in Ireland or superstars living life on the road. And in Rudd and Jonas, Carney has great collaborators, with both giving some of the finest work of their careers. Jonas impresses with his take on Danny not as some sort of evil industry plant, but as a conflicted artist who once tasted success and is fearful that he'll never reach those same heights again. The ping-pong nature of Danny's feelings towards Rick are captured well by the singer-slash-actor, who's able to find a lot of nuance in the role. As for Rudd, besides proving that he can carry a tune rather well, Power Ballad marks the first time he's played a character that feels painfully vulnerable, and at times not all that charming. While Rick is in the moral right here, the film shows the character growing more unhinged and desperate the longer his dispute with Danny carries on. Rudd isn't only funny in Power Ballad, but can also be painfully sad at the same time, and his chemistry in scenes opposite Jonas is spot on. Not much is in doubt throughout Power Ballad, and the ending can be seen coming from quite a distance, but Carney handles his characters like flesh and blood human beings and not cogs in a well-worn plotline. It's also a bold choice to ensure that both of the primary characters are deeply flawed and not perfectly likable. There's a lot of comedic discomfort throughout Power Ballad, but it's purposeful and not cringe in the wrong kind of way. Things go wrong, connections are missed, people misconstrue meaning, and neglecting to have second thoughts brings consequences to both parties. It's a standard through line, but not always cliched, and that's why Power Ballad gets a solid 7 out of 10 from me.
If you could do anything, what would you do?
Pack up and go see the world.
What's your name?
Caroline, what about you?
Oliver.
And what are you doing here, Oliver?
Passing through.
Just passing through, huh?
You've been going like 500 dates with me.
Uh-huh. You ever feel bad doing what you do?
I don't, because it's a con. I don't do it out of greed. I don't do it out of anger. I just see the angle.
Seeing the angle. Wondering if that's all something I could ever do.
Blossoming cult favorite filmmaker Adam Rehmeyer follows up his indie darling efforts Dinner in America and Snack Shack with the outlaw romance of Caroline, the arresting, vibrant, and exhilarating tale of a young woman coming into her own on the back streets and highways of the United States by realizing her dreams aren't all they're cracked up to be. Samara Weaving stars as Caroline, a sheltered country girl from a Texas oil mining town who has an unlikely meet-cute with Oliver, played by Rehmeyer favorite Kyle Gallner. Oliver, if that is his real name, is an artful Dodger-style grifter that Caroline catches in the middle of a classic money-switching scam at a gas station. Caroline is immediately taken by Oliver and his bad boy ways and is willing to hit the road with him and learn the skills of his illegal trade. Oliver, who has convoluted, morally sketchy justifications for his crimes, teaches Caroline how to steal cars, pickpocket, and look for all available angles for a scam, eventually graduating her to the level of bank robbery. Eventually, she's more like the muscle and he's more like the getaway driver. But just as she starts to get hooked on the outlaw life, second thoughts about her relationship to Oliver settle in, and an encounter with her estranged mother, played by Kira Sedgwick, threatens to upend the happy niche Caroline has found for herself. Set in a time period where these kinds of crimes would have been easier to pull off and get away with, Caroline basks in a love for all things American. Muscle cars, open roads, the sounds of classic rock and country coming through the radio, and honky-tonk bars. Rehmeyer's work is dripping in atmosphere and a steamy sense of romance that matches the summertime heat of the settings. The scenery of Caroline is so entrancing and lived in that it makes you want to roll up a hard pack of smokes in the sleeve of a plain white tee, hop in a Camaro, and do some burnouts on a country back road. Or as these kids like to say these days, the vibes are impeccable. The leads are perfectly matched here, with Gallner continuing his streak of impressive performances as of late. His take on a seemingly kind drifter is it turns charismatic, commanding, and threatening whenever called upon, and Gallner is able to switch things up on a dime and is always ready when called upon to pivot the story. As for Weaving, her character is delicately built around the eventual shift it will have to take. She starts off by playing Caroline as an addict who's had her first shot of adrenaline, but she's smart enough to never fully settle into so much of a groove that she can't tell when something is amiss. She's gullible to an extent, but never stupid, and once Caroline's good nature starts to spiral, Weaving's performance hits another level of excellence entirely. And special mention has to go to Sedgwick, who pops up for one of the most impressionable and unnerving single-scene performances of all time. It's the kind of thing where even though the character doesn't get a lot of screen time, it could still generate considerable awards buzz because of their overall impact on the film and the direction it takes from there. But Caroline isn't a perfect film. There are strange gaps in the storytelling where it almost feels like scenes that could connect major events were never shot or were cut from the film for pacing reasons. The pacing and escalation are simplistic, with Raymeyer proving that he loves montages and callbacks a bit too much. The film also blunts its own impact by letting the viewer know right from the beginning that things are going to go to gloomy, doomed places, meaning there's not much surprise when the story's eventual point of no return is reached. But even so, that switch from romance to darkness is nailed with a good amount of authority and believability, so it still manages to register. A tighter construction could make this one rank higher, but it's still good enough to land a 7 out of 10.
It's a story that anybody can relate to.
You're Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz.
It can't be true.
Judy Garland felt incredible pressure to live up to Dorothy.
We have so many different renditions of Dorothy.
I never saw myself being Dorothy.
It was such an outer-body experience, like I was Dorothy.
Dorothy Gale is just so iconic.
Because of how the film was received initially, I always assumed nobody saw it. Nobody at all.
Me being the only human on the set was hilarious.
What? Jeffrey McHale looks at what makes the young heroine at the heart of The Wizard of Oz so memorable with the documentary It's Dorothy, which specifically turns to alternative perspectives on the subject to create an elaborate sort of biography and oral history of a fictional character. For over 125 years since the first book featuring author L. Frank Baum's characters, Dorothy Gale and her friends from The Wizard of Oz have been the stuff of fairy tale legend, one that only grew in stature after the story's first big-screen adaptation with Judy Garland in the lead. In the century since, Dorothy has been a symbol of hope and aspiration for people who dream of living a better, happier life somewhere over the rainbow. Through various adaptations and a variety of different media and tones, darker and lighter and more subtextual takes on the character of Dorothy have come to the forefront, many of which are reflections of both modern societal advancements and issues, and also of the lives of the people tasked with taking on such a noteworthy role. McHale, director of the Showgirls standing documentary You Don't Know Me, looks at Dorothy from both detailed and broad perspectives alike, making for a film that provides great culturally critical overview and deeply personal connections to the subject matter. It's Dorothy examines less what the story means to children and adults that have grown up with the stories, and more about LGBTQS+ representation, the perspectives of people of color, and even from members of the disability community. To add further depth, McHale sits down with various performers who portrayed Dorothy on stage, in films, or on television specials, including Muppet Wizard of Oz star Ashanti, Return to Oz star Fairuza Balk, and BBC reality show contest winner Danielle Hope, all of whom thoughtfully reflect on what the role means to them and how the expectations placed upon them sometimes led to darker places. Dorothy scholars, thought leaders, and fellow artists like Roxane Gay, Rufus Wainwright, Lena Waithe, and John Waters also speak eloquently on what the character means to them personally and as part of a larger culture that spans generations. The interviews are often frank and impassioned, drawing links between Dorothy and major historical and cultural movements. McHale examines how the phrase Friends of Dorothy in the revisionist musical The Wiz ushered in major cultural shifts during times of intolerance and persecution for Black and queer communities. the film doesn't shy away from the darkness at the heart of Judy Garland's career before, during, and after the production of The Wizard of Oz, nor does it overlook Baum's racist attitudes towards indigenous peoples. In the eyes of McHale and the film's subject, these things only make the reclamation of Dorothy as an icon even more empowering and subversive. It's Dorothy covers a lot of ground, maybe a bit too much, but so much of what McHale gets from his subject is great, so the feeling of the film being overstuffed at times never detracts away from the thoughtful whole. This is great Pride Month viewing that's currently in select theaters, is available on Peacock in the US, and comes to VOD everywhere next week. It's going to get a 7 out of 10.
I don't know if anyone else has attempted to do this much for a children's show before.
His name is Wishbone, and he stars in his own public television series.
It's a show about a remarkable dog who will introduce millions of kids to great books.
Giving children an excitement for reading.
It was kids and dogs.
The most expressive dog I've ever seen on a camera.
The dog was an actor. You're working with another actor.
Whole group of people that came together to work on something that they had never really done.
Starting in 1995, American kids, and anyone in neighboring countries with access to public television, became enamored and charmed by the adventures of a book-loving Jack Russell Terrier named Wishbone. Every afternoon, Wishbone would dive into another literary classic where he played the hero of the story, instilling a love of reading in young, impressionable viewers. Some online today still think Wishbone is the best version of Jane Austen's iconic Mr. Darcy, and they might not be wrong. But I digress. What's the Story Wishbone, which can now be viewed on public television stations as well as on VOD starting June 10th, takes fans behind the scenes of a show that technically only lasted for the span of 2 very lopsided seasons and a made-for-cable movie, but left a big impression in the hearts and minds of fans everywhere. Director Joey Stewart, who worked as a second and first AD on the series, sits down with creator Rick Duffield, voice actor Larry Brantley, and producer Betty Buckley, and more to talk about the process of making the show. While the range of interviews done for What's the Story Wishbone isn't particularly extensive, the film does showcase just how much of a labor of love the show was for many of the people involved, and the overall complexity of running a series with so many moving parts on an almost impossible schedule. It's often said that in show business you shouldn't work with dogs and kids if you want to stay on track, and the leads for Wishbone were indeed kids and a dog. Duffield and his collaborators all give the show's late canine star Soccer all the appropriate flowers, stating that he was the most professional pooch one could have ever hoped to work with. But even with the star problem sorted, Wishbone posed a unique set of challenges that required inspired solutions. The old format of children's television meant that a new show had to be provided for every weekday, leading to a first season comprised of 40 episodes, meaning everyone, including Soccer, had to be on top of their game every day, and every installment had a writing and shooting process like an episode of SNL. The script is done on a Monday, and the episode has to be in the can and edited by Friday night. To complicate matters further, unlike other shows produced for daily airing, the creators of Wishbone made the creative decision to shoot everything on 16mm film instead of on video, and to facilitate such a wild schedule, the production department essentially created a miniature town and sound stages in North Texas to keep the costs down, and then employed their own stock company of performers for the show's fantasy sequences that pulled from the many actors in the local Dallas theater scene. What comes through loudest and most prominently in What's the Story Wishbone is just how much thought, effort, time, and care went into the crafting of a kids' show, a lot of which can now be appreciated by the adults who grew up on it. Wishbone comes across like an act of devotion to a concept that everyone worked hard at to deliver to the best of their abilities. That ambition and scope might have been both ahead of and behind the times as the children's television industry began to cut costs and shift its focuses, but who would really know just how complex a show like this was outside of those who made it and those who watched Stewart's documentary? What's the Story Wishbone gets a heartwarming and inspired 6 out of 10 from me.
A bunch of other yahoos got in on the act.
I'm all in. Are you?
You know what? I'm in.
Oh, I'm in, bro.
Now here's the thing. Celebrities have always shilled products, ever since there have been celebrities. Even my wife has done it. There's nothing wrong with that. But this isn't a sandwich or skin cream. This was a financial product.
Crypto will really be the future. And
if you aren't a licensed financial advisor, you're not supposed to offer people financial advice. It's literally illegal.
It's the new wave. It's what everybody's doing.
As an actor, I'm a professional bullshitter.
I don't think so.
And my gut told me the guys selling people on crypto were full of it.
It's a cryptocurrency you can trade for conventional money.
Oh, so it's a hustle.
Yeah, it's a hustle.
Why did you say that, man? Father, everybody. It's a hustle. To the moon.
Up against a multi-trillion-dollar industry shilled by every celebrity on the planet, I did what any other actor would do in my position. I hired a film crew.
This is Giorgio. He's going to be filming me.
Is he gonna film?
He's going to film, yeah. He's going to make a movie. You want to be in a movie?
Yes.
Actor Ben McKenzie says he knows a thing or two about lying, and he's going to put those skills, in addition to his degree in economics, to good use in his documentary, Everyone is Lying to You for Money, a funny, candid, and thought-provoking look at the allure and danger of investing in cryptocurrency. McKenzie, who freely admits that he'll probably always be seen as Ryan from the OC, first looked into Bitcoin during the pandemic when one of his friends was attempting to give him financial advice, after this same friend had previously been wildly wrong about a stock tip in the past. The more McKenzie looked into how this profoundly and proudly unregulated form of currency worked, the more confused he became and even more convinced that the whole thing was some sort of scam. Unable to get straight answers, he decided to create a documentary where he tries to unpack his own misgivings about crypto and explain why it's a bad bet for most people with many downsides and pitfalls. McKenzie brings a lot of nosy little shit energy to his documentary, and I mean that in a positive way. Unafraid of stirring the pot and disrupting those who claim to be disruptors themselves, McKenzie walks a fine line. In some candid on-camera sit-downs, like one with the disgraced head of Celsius, McKenzie adopts a performance as a naive actor who claims to know nothing about crypto. In others, like an awkward sit-down with now-imprisoned FTX head Sam Bankman-Fried, McKenzie effortlessly slots into the role of investigative, hard-nosed journalist. In some of the film's most humorous moments, McKenzie can admit to when he's being foolish, but he suffers fools and those who underestimate him far less. He's never shy about calling people out directly to their faces. He goes about his research and travels and the online backlash he receives like someone without anything to lose. McKenzie's goal here is to dispel any and all myths at the heart of the cult of crypto. That it's an egalitarian system that's beholden to lines of code and not an elite-run banking system. That it's some sort of electronic gold that will somehow democratize the monetary system around the world. And that it can turn average people into millionaires overnight if they could ever access the true amount of the funds they're holding. The computer says the amount of money in one's crypto wallet is enormous, but how much of that is actually backed by real capital and not theoretical funds? In truth, code can be misleading. The gap between those making money and those losing it is enormous, and a truly unregulated system means there's no way or desire to stop bad actors from unfairly profiting. McKenzie shows empathy towards those who flock towards the flickering promise of free money just sitting out in the open, and how this can lead to cult-like mentalities where people double down on their own worst impulses and advice just to keep feeling the rush of being a part of history. McKenzie captures the feeling of that rush by delivering not only a smart documentary with Everyone is Lying to You for Money, but also a relentlessly stylish one. It speaks plainly, honestly, and asks great questions of its viewers and subjects. Most importantly of all, McKenzie doesn't claim to be a licensed financial advisor, and rightfully points out that all of the celebrities who have shilled or proselytized for crypto aren't either. McKenzie wants people to understand that the distance from the moon to the basement can be traveled in lightning-fast time amid the current financial climate, and then to ask themselves if the benefits outweigh the risks. This is an 8 out of 10, a great bit of work from McKenzie, and one of the year's most entertaining and engaging documentaries.
Choose life, choose a job, choose a career, choose a family, choose a big television.
You're a quiet, sensitive type. A little bit crazy, a little bit bad. But hey, don't ask Gibbons, just love that.
Hey, choose washing machines, cars, choose DIY and wondering who the you are on a Sunday morning.
Returning to theaters in a 4K restoration in time to celebrate the film's 30th anniversary is Danny Boyle's landmark addiction drama Trainspotting. Opening percussively and with one of the most iconic monologues in cinematic history, Trainspotting, adapted from the Irvine Welsh novel of the same name, is told from the perspective of Mark Renton, played by Ewan McGregor in one of his earliest star-making performances. Renton hangs out with a close-knit group of mates committing petty crimes in an impoverished part of Edinburgh and doing lots of heroin, pills, and any other drugs they can get their dirty little hands on. The film follows Renton, Sick Boy, played by Johnny Lee Miller, Spud, played by Ewan Bremner, and Tommy, played by Kevin McKidd, as they go through cycles of addiction and recovery, often with stark consequences. Trainspotting walks along the razor's edge of depicting drug use. At times it can feel electrifying and alive, but most of the time it's seen as a disgusting means to an end. The Pyrrhic victory of achieving happiness at too high of a mental, financial, and physical cost. While it was derided by some critics of the time for making drug addiction look too good, I've always been of the mindset that Trainspotting makes it look like nasty and dangerous business. Who else would crawl inside the dirtiest toilet in Scotland just to retrieve a hit, unlettingly know an infant die, or concoct a plan to buy a ton of heroin following the funeral of a friend who just died from toxoplasmic HIV as a result of his using? I don't know anyone who would find those actions fun, and the film doesn't try to make them look that way, even when it employs some dark comedy to add a bit more bite. Boyle shows compassion for those who need a little extra something to get through the day, but in spite of Renton's early speech about choosing to live life on one's own terms, there's a lot of skepticism throughout Trainspotting that serves as a cautionary tale. Boyle and screenwriter John Hodge operate in a hyper-stylized, bleakly comedic fashion where everything is purposefully outsized and the events being depicted are appropriately life and death in scale, no matter if a scene is intended to be funny or shocking. There's gravity and weight to Trainspotting that many lesser films about addiction ever come close to achieving, and if anything in our current climate where the closest thing anyone has to such material like this is the dreadful series Euphoria, Trainspotting has aged impeccably outside of a subplot involving an underage woman, played by a debuting Kelly MacDonald, who blackmails Renton into having a relationship with her. The restoration brings all of Trainspotting's grimy and gritty delights to life on the big screen once again, and serves as a reminder that McGregor has been an outstanding leading performer for a full 30 years now, and that while Boyle has grown as a filmmaker, his early career still showcases some of his finest work. Trainspotting is and has always been a solid 8 out of 10 movie, and well worth catching up to if you haven't already.
Guess who's back?
Shit.
Back again.
My God, he stabbed her! Not her! My pronouns are they, them. He stabbed them!
We back.
With the rise of legacy sequels, reboots, and the overall resurgence of the horror genre in recent years, it was perhaps inevitable that the scary movie franchise would once again poke its mischievous, blatantly offensive head into multiplexes again. But just like the kinds of movies it seeks to lampoon, this revival, made under the supervision of its original Wayans Brothers creators, succumbs to the same sort of exhaustion and repetition. A film with a few memorable sketches and no cohesive thread except regurgitating the plot of the fifth Scream movie more or less verbatim, with a couple of tangential asides, this scary movie ranks higher than the last couple of Wayans-free sequels that audiences got, but it doesn't justify the revival of the franchise in any way. Following an inspired but still uneven cold open that riffs on Drop and Screams 4 and 6, but curiously not 5, Scary Movie sheepishly offers up its semblance of plot. Sarah Campbell, played by Olivia Rose Keegan, is the pill-addled, traumatized eldest daughter of Scary Movie survivor Cindy, once again played by Anna Faris. Her younger sister Tuesday, played by Savannah Lee Nassif, has recently been attacked by Ghostface and no one is safe once again. The band gets back together, including Cindy's bestie Brenda, played by Regina Hall, Brenda's closeted gay husband Ray, played by Sean Wayans, and the always stoned and laughing Shorty, played by Marlon Wayans. They even bring back the mentally disabled and problematic David Arquette surrogate Officer Doofy, played by Dave Sheridan, for good measure. And once everyone is brought back into the fold, weirdly that's where Scary Movie starts to lose steam and devolves into just a bunch of sketches where the Wayanses and the rest of the cast riff on movies from the past decade of horror cinema. It mostly sticks to the recent Scream movies, especially the fifth film's firm belief that the love interest has to be the killer, but also throws in some shots at the likes of Final Destination Bloodlines, Get Out, Terrifier 3, the David Gordon Green Halloween reboots, Weapon, Sinners, Smile, The Substance, and Longlegs. Although weirdly they make reference to It Follows and some other recent classics, they also note that these movies are quote-unquote obscure and that the references need to be explained to the viewer. Some of them tie into the plot, some of them, like a weirdly lifeless parody of Michael, just sit there and do nothing. I can't tell if Scary Movie is the kind of project where Haunted House and 50 Shades of Black director Michael Tinney's used everything that they filmed, or he cherry-picked from the bits that seemed funniest. And I use the term funniest lightly, because for every chuckle to be found here, there are huge swaths that can't even produce a smile. And that's not because Scary Movie is once again gunning to be an equal opportunity offender that doesn't care about poor taste or woke culture. Mostly the jokes just aren't that great, and no amount of energy or framing can make them work. Scary Movie is the type of thing that still makes jokes about OJ, COVID tests, and out-of-date memes with hopes that they still hold some kind of mainstream relevance. And when Scary Movie does try to openly offend, the filmmakers have a strange way of doing it that follows a predictable pattern. They'll make a joke, frequently here at the expense of trans people and the use of pronouns, then have the joke teller be made to look like an uneducated fool, before looping back around and letting the person who started the gag have the last word. It's like getting slapped, being apologized to, and then getting a slap for wanting an apology. Honestly, I'd rather be offended in an honest manner, not whatever wishy-washy approach this is. There are some bright spots in the cast, especially Marlon Wayans, who's an underrated performer who always brings a lot of energy no matter the project. Hall can get a chuckle from just a facial expression, Kim Wayans as a constantly annoyed nurse is great, and Keegan is the film's secret MVP, who brings a kind of silly lunacy that helps to prop up some of the movie's slower, less funny passages. With all the time that's passed since the Wayans brothers have worked on the franchise, one thinks they'd have a lot more to work with, but apparently not. This one gets a 3 out of 10. It's mostly a sloppy slog that bounces around from scene to scene, trying and failing to get much of a reaction. If you aren't seeing Scary Movie both slizzled out of your mind and in the middle of a rowdy crowd, this is going to be a tough sit.
Let me ask you a question. What is your worst fear?
Max Cady was released from prison.
What does that have to do with us?
He's been locked up 17 years for a murder he didn't do.
You were his lawyer, right?
I had a good life once, too. Are you afraid of me?
Why would I be afraid of you?
Showrunner Nick Antosca, who worked on the Act and brand new Cherry Flavor, teams up with producers Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg for a refreshed but different take on the stalker thriller Cape Fear, itself adapted twice from John D. MacDonald's novel The Executioners. The overall thrust and intent of Cape Fear is the same as its 1962 and 1991 predecessors, but a few new characters, twists, and tweaks help to flesh things out to full series length, and for the most part they result in a very trashy but highly entertaining bit of stormy evening viewing. Amy Adams and Patrick Wilson star as Anna and Tom Bowden, married lawyers from Savannah, Georgia, and parents of two very different teens who work together at a non-profit that seeks to free and exonerate wrongly convicted inmates. But there's one recent release from prison that neither of them hope to ever see again, and one that if they had their way, would never be seen again. Max Cady, a former restaurateur played by Javier Bardem, was convicted in the murder of his wife, but released after his former mistress pleads guilty 17 years after his conviction. At his controversial trial, the then pregnant and very much married Anna was Max's lawyer, and she began an affair with Tom, who just so happened to be the prosecutor. Now heavily tattooed and suffering from a bit of brain damage after a beating in prison, Max cozies up to Anna and Tom's family and coworkers, acting like he wants to help them out, but at the same time a lot of unnerving, threatening, and disgusting things keep happening to the Bowden family. Instead of always making it seem like Max is behind everything wrong in Tom and Anna's life, this take on Cape Fear shows there's plenty of crazy to go around, and that Max also has people that he should fear lurking in the shadows. The core concept of a released prisoner seeking revenge on those who wronged him remains front and center in Antosca's version of the story, but it's elevated by an oppressively bleak and convincingly sleazy atmosphere of deceptions and long-dormant secrets. It might be a turnoff to some that there's only one relatively likable character to be found in the entirety of Cape Fear, that being Anna and Tom's queer eldest daughter Natalie, played wonderfully by Lily Collius. Everyone else in the show is either glaringly evil or just a run-of-the-mill unethical dirtbag. It is capital N nasty, and that's mostly what I enjoy about it. Somehow this version of Cape Fear is able to remain suspenseful because its countless twists, swerves, and jump scares are novel around these kinds of characters. It's a blissfully nihilistic show where having a bad taste in one's mouth is par for the course. Its violence is brutal and gory, the sense of humor is sickening, and the show's inspired use of the original film's musical scores underlines everything perfectly. A lot of the show's use of modern technology to forward everyone's means by drones, true crime podcasts, and catfishing art is inspired, and there's absolutely no good reason for this to drag out to 10 full episodes, but when Cape Fear is cooking, there's absolutely no stopping it. Adams has always shown a talent for playing morally ambiguous authority figures, and she's perfectly in her element here. Wilson is an inspired choice for a character that presents as a straight shooter but is harboring some debilitating secrets. Joe Anders brings a lot of dead-eyed creepiness to his role as the Bowden's maladjusted son, and the always wonderful CCH Pounder gets a great part here as Anna's hopelessly career-focused boss, who refuses to acknowledge that bringing Max into the charity's fold is going to bring her employee no small amount of mental anguish and torture. But the show is built around the whims and constantly changing moods and modes of Bardem's Max Cady. Instead of playing the character like Robert De Niro's iconic performance from Scorsese's 1991 adaptation, Bardem speaks softer, more eloquently, and in a lower register, bringing more eerie shades of gray to the role instead of constant, outright cackling menace. It's another memorably chilling performance from Bardem, and the character ultimately determines where the series has to head as a whole, but it's not solely upon Bardem to bring discomfort and queasiness to the viewer. The aforementioned Anders has some moments to make people question where the Bowden's son's mind is at. The third episode introduces another actor to the fold whose presence shouldn't be spoiled, but is playing a character that can both match and surpass Bardem's freak, so to speak. But the biggest surprise of the show has to be Malia Piles, who plays a mysterious young drifter who seems to be trying very hard to integrate herself romantically into the lives of both of the Bowden kids. Piles' performance here is a star-making one, and the creative team knows it, giving her the chance to riff on an iconic scene from the 1991 film instead of letting Bardem handle it. You can't take your eyes off of her. Every episode of Cape Fear made me feel like I needed a shower to wash off a full day's worth of grime and sweat, and it turns out that's exactly what I wanted to feel from this show. It's not high art in the traditional sense, but it's finding a sweet spot between elevated sleaze and postmodern camp that's positively intoxicating. It might not end up being your cup of tea, but this is an 8 out of 10 from me. It is an absolutely wild ride. And that brings us to the end of another edition of Out of Time Reviews. What did you think of any of the titles we talked about in this week's show? Leave a note in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and have a great week.